Alright, so in this chapter, let's see what is this error handling is about. And errors are basically sort of outputs that invoke by our backend or any other application once we do some sort of a mistake, right? So these can be either syntax errors or maybe logical errors, or it can be route errors or something like that. So syntax errors are basically it invokes because of some sort of a problem in your code. So such as, let's say, a semicolon or mismatching some sort of parentheses in your code. So they may invoke syntax errors. And second type of errors are basically logical errors. So logical errors are kind of errors that invokes at the runtime. Because if there exists some sort of logic that produce some sort of unexpected results, then it is logically wrong, right? Even if you write semantically correct, it can be even if you write syntactically correct, it can be semantically wrong, right? In such cases, there can be logical errors. So they invoke at runtime, and they can be having route errors. So typically in web applications we have routes to access our resources. So the errors that are on route definitions may invoke some sort of errors. So such as if you have misspelled routes, or if you have duplicate routes, they may result to generate some sort of route errors. And middleware errors is basically the errors that come from the errors relies on the middleware. So we will discuss what is this middleware about in the next video, because this is a very important topic when it comes to backend development like Express. But anyway, so middleware is like a function that we place in between two functions. So it may invoke some errors that cause some sort of unexpected results. So this may happen because of some procedure error inside the middleware, or this can happen a middleware is called but it is placed in a wrong place, right? So such use cases may result to middleware errors as well. And there can be having database errors, which means if your database tier invoke any sort of error results, this may produce database errors. So for example, let's say you have specified the connection to the database, but let's say that connection string is wrong. And for another example, let's say you are executing a certain query, but the query definitions are wrong, right? Or field definitions are wrong. In such cases, there can be having a database errors. Validation errors mean in your application you handle quite a lot of data, right? So this data needs to be validated before they are processed or even stored. Otherwise, any sort of malicious data can be inserted in your or passed in your through your services, which is very vulnerable, right? So there can be having a very critical security issues if you just pass data through your services without validating it, right? So in any secured service, there should be a proper validation. So based on the validation, there can be invoke any errors, right? For example, let's say if there is a record that should be an email, but the user is passing some sort of invalid email address, then the email validator will invoke an error by saying this is not a validate email, right? So such a error is a validation error, right? So obviously in most applications we have these sort of errors. These errors may typically not cause to the problems in the execution of our application, but they may cause errors for the user's perspective, right? So validation errors are another type of errors that we encounter in web development. And last error type is basically authentication and authorization errors. So again, this is some sort of a security concern in your application. So let's say there are several functions, so there are several resources in your service that is need to be secure, that is need to be used by a secure connection or properly authorized connection. So in such cases, first we need to authenticate and authorize our users. So in that process, it may generate certain errors as well, right? So in the later on this tutorial, we are going to do this authorization and authentication chapter as well. So in that chapter, you will see how we can handle these errors as well, right? So yeah, typically those are the errors. So as you can see, there are a lot of types of an error that can be generated in your application, right? So if you are willing to handle each and every errors separately, it will be a very difficult task, right? Because these errors are generated from different components, and if the correct error is not handled in the correct fashion, there will be furthermore errors, right? So in such case, we need a common agreement to handle these errors that can be invoked in the different component of your application. So what we are going to do is, we are going to do a proper error handling mechanism over here. We are going to follow a proper error handling mechanism over there. So basically we have several types of errors. So error can be logical errors, or route errors, or DB errors, validation errors, or authentication errors, right? So these different types of errors, first we encapsulate those errors in a common object, right? So that object is, let's say, app error. So whenever logical error is invoked, it will encapsulate that error details in this app error object. Whenever route error is occurred, it will encapsulate those error details in this app error object. Likewise, for each error, they will construct a separate app error object to express their error. Then these objects will be passed to a global error handling middleware. So error handling middleware, we will specify, okay, if this is a logical error, then do this stuff. If this is a route error, do this stuff. Or if it is a database error, do this procedures. Likewise, for each error, we are handling that specific error inside this global error handler. Then we have a more readable and more modifiable sort of a error handler functions inside this middleware. And once that error is handled, it will be passed to the corresponding component as an error message, right? So this can be a bundle of error messages, or it can be a single error message, right? And most probably in our application, these error messages will be returned back to user in a very user-friendly way, because we don't need to show all the necessary details for the user, right? So when we are at the production level, there will be a very user-friendly error messages, right? But obviously, when we are at the development phase, since we are at the development, we need to have some descriptive error messages. So in the development environment, we will be having, the message error messages or error message bodies, and the stack trace and things like that. So that's a sort of a distinguish between development and production environment. But either way, there will be sort of bundled standard error messages that is going to be written in the global error handler middleware. Right, so that's the understanding, so that's the basic idea about this error handling, and the next I will teach you what is this middleware is about. Okay, thank you.